book discussion, Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain. I talk a lot about books here. I discuss books, and I've mentioned several times on this podcast why I do this. I think this one is a very special one for several reasons. First, Thomas Mann is my favorite German writer. I was born in Switzerland. My native tongue is German, so certainly a very big, important part of my intellectual definition is, of course, the writers that I consider my favorite writers, and Thomas Mann is definitely one of them. By the way, as far as English language is concerned, British would be Somerset Maugham, and American Wallace Stegner, just to complete that. But I don't want to talk about this. I want to focus on Thomas Mann. The Magic Mountain is a book that, in many ways, I think finds a very deep, sensitive part of my soul. And I use the word soul very deliberately, because part of this book, and I'm going to talk about this in this particular episode, is the limits of reason and the limits of analytics and the limits of the scientific method as we thought it should be practiced back 100 years ago when this book was written. I think today we're a little bit further in our knowledge of how epistemology works. But back then, I think the limits of reason were still very much in question, and this is part of the book discussion. But I'm going to discuss this book. Like I said many times before, we talk about books because reading is not just a pastime for hedge fund managers, it is part of the job. It is actually a very, very important part of the job, because reading is like the conditioning of the mind. The same way a mixed martial artist is training, she is going to train her striking and her jiu-jitsu and her wrestling. She's also going to do conditioning. She's going to do pull-ups, push-ups, running, whatever she needs to do to condition her body. And the same way we consider reading is conditioning of the mind, which is incredibly important in the discipline of risk, because the discipline of risk has a lot to do with brain, with analytics, with thinking. It has to do with other things too, but mostly it is a discipline of using our analytical abilities towards the application of capital towards risk. So that's why we think reading books is important. And this is one of the big books, one of the books that influences me in particular. I think it has a big meaning for the rest of humanity. It's a book that describes the human condition in a very long, very elaborate storytelling type of way. And I'm going to focus on the following themes in this particular discussion. I'm going to focus on 4 pillars. One is reason, the other is mysticism, or the anti-reason. One is love, and then last one is death and creation. So the death and the creation, which are intertwined, which belong to each other like yin and yang. So those are the 4 things I want to focus on. This is a Not Even Wrong podcast. It's December 9th, 2021. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is down 9.2%. The market's down 70 basis points. For the year, we are up 27.6%. The market is up 22.3%. We're outperforming by 5.4%. So let's jump right into the Magic Mountain. Just before I go there, the drawdown came from a risk-off trade in the markets, in particular Tesla. I think the news on Tesla are not as concerning, so I think it's more of a macro drive. We were down about 6% in our Tesla. I mean, the contribution to the portfolio of Tesla was minus 6%, and the contribution of the biotechs and Bitcoin was about minus 3%. So, which tells you kind of that it wasn't just a Tesla story. That's the only good news of today. But I think one of the news items of Tesla that I still want to mention before I go into the book discussion, it's the China sales, which came relatively pedestrian, and that means that probably the gist of this is that we might have some issues with production, and therefore we might have some issues with supply chain. And this is just something that we have to keep in mind. It's of course a risk for Tesla. No matter how strong demand is, if they can't produce, then we will have issues along the lines of supply chain. But let's jump into the book now. The Magic Mountain And this is a very, very deep, very elaborate tome. So I was thinking, should I maybe split this discussion into several episodes? And I'm against that because I think one of the value propositions that I believe I can bring with this particular podcast is to give people a bit of a short, concise, bite-sized thought process. I'm absolutely not against long-form podcasts. I do think, though, that there's a certain limit, even in the long-form podcasts. So we're talking about people like Lex Friedman or Joe Rogan. I feel like there's a sort of a human limit of maybe an hour and a half max of value-added concentration. After that, it becomes, let's say, a little bit more pedestrian when it comes to conversations and things like that. So this is just my thought. So I'm, again, not against long form, but the purpose, the technique in this particular podcast is to keep it in a sort of 10 to 20 minute range, because it should be a sort of a bite-sized podcast that gives people certain ideas, certain nudges into, okay, this is what we're thinking, this is the discussion of the book, this is why the market's up or down, whatever the theme of the day might be. We want to do it in a bite-sized form, and we want to keep it even discussing something as big and large and deep as The Magic Mouth by Thomas Mann. So this is a bit challenging, but there is also some beauty in being concise, putting the really relevant stuff out there and keeping it as short and beautiful as possible. So we're going to talk about 4 things in this particular conversation. And like I said, it's going to be reason, anti-reason or mysticism, love, and the yin and yang of death and creation. Those are the 4 things. Let's go one by one. Reason, the 2 main figures in this book, other than our protagonist, which is Hans Castorp, are Sant'Ambrini and Nafta. Sant'Ambrini is the humanist, the sort of intellectual, sort of next generation Renaissance man, the man that believes in society, in civilization, in things that I would say the Enlightenment stands for. Nafta is sort of the antithesis to that. Nafta is not just a reactionary in the sense that he's saying, look, your reason, your analytics, your scientific method, your so-called civilization is not going to work. He's reactionary also in a way that he's trying to preserve what is not explainable by reason. And this is very important. He is therefore certainly in the tradition of people like Kant, for example. Kant, as much as he is part of the Western philosophy legacy, Kant, for example, has also written incredibly deep about for example, the loop between observation, experience, and theory, and how there's a feedback loop where observations are theory law. And Kant was mentioning that, Popper is mentioning that, of course, David Deutsch talks about this. So we can't just say that there's a reality out there that we can observe and understand. We have to be very careful when we talk about these things. So this is certainly part of this legacy that also Nafta is trying to put out there. Nafta is, again, he's the other character. These 2 characters, it gets to a climax in the book where these 2 characters literally physically attack each other. I don't want to give away things, but I think that this is fair to say that this fight, this conflict between reason and, let's call it, whatever else is there. So, because I don't want to call it mysticism, certainly not religious thinking. It is something else. It is something else. The thing that comes beyond reason, or the thing we can't explain with reason, those 2 forces are confronting each other by the end of the 19th century, during the time of the formation, of the intellectual formation of Thomas Mann, and they're culminating in this book. So one of the big themes of the Magic Mountain is the confrontation between reason and whatever comes beyond reason. I want to talk about this a little bit in terms of practical application for today, because I think it's incredibly important. We have said that in several episodes that we believe that the Nietzschean quote, "God is dead," can be used today in the financial markets and generally also in science as maybe not reason and science are dead. That would be too much. But there are limits to reason. There are limits to reason because we don't exactly have the vocabulary and the tools to express knowledge and our observation and feelings and our, let's call it knowledge. We don't have the tools. So the language that we use, which is words, linguistics, mathematics, and all the other tools that we have in order to express what we feel and what we observe, which is basically feeling is another way for observing, because what is feeling? Feeling is simply everything we observe, reason, and all the other stuff that we cannot explain with reason. That's what we call feeling. So whatever we feel, we're not able to observe, and this happens in the financial markets. So this is very practical today. We've said that in one of the previous episodes, that we have a paradigm shift in financial markets. We require new explanatory knowledge in terms of how to deal with exponential growth. We need new explanatory knowledge of how to deal with entrepreneurs that are able to iterate at much lower cost in the physical space. This is, in very practical terms, a problem that we have today and that the finance, academic industry, and also everybody else who's interested should be working on. So this is a very nice example of how explanatory knowledge has reached limits because the kind of finance knowledge, or let's call it the explanatory knowledge about financial markets that was pioneered sort of in the 1950s in Chicago, is reaching its limits because back then the iteration and exponential growth in the physical space were not possible. Back then they weren't even possible in the software space, but certainly not in the physical space. The reason we have now much cheaper iteration in the physical space is mainly due to computers and information technology and also AI. AI in the sense that we can algorithmatize a lot of processes and therefore, for example, have something like a DALI, which is the ability to simulate videos and therefore maybe create simulated reality in video, which then can be used to self-learn self-driving cars. For example, this is just one example that we're very interested in at Orange Capital Partners. So let's get back to Magic Mountain. So this particular dichotomy between what reason has to offer, or how reason is sort of giving us tools to explain what we observe and to explain knowledge in general, to explain reality or what we call reality, that has limits. That's what NAFTA is telling Sant'Ambrini. Sant'Ambrini on the other side is saying, yes, there are limits, but if you don't abide to reason, you end up in chaos. You end up in a bad place. Mysticism, anti-reason, anti-science, anti-whatever you want to call it, ends up in uncivilized behavior, in things like inquisition and bad things. Mann was too early with this novel to anticipate Bolshevism and Nazism, fascism. He was about 10 years too early for that. But certainly what NAFTA is saying is very true. If you give up reason, you can slip very quickly into fascism or Bolshevism, which I'm sure Mann would have subscribed to the idea that those are the same things, just from different angles. So this conflict between NAFTA and Sant'Ambrini is, I would say, the fundamental forces that are pushing against each other in this novel. Their fundamental forces are pushing against each other, I think, still today. This is what humanity, what the human condition actually consists of. Reason versus what? Now, the fact that we have reason, the fact that we invented something like empiricism, observation, theory, all these things are huge achievements of humanity. It took us thousands and thousands of years of evolution to get there. And we don't want to just give that away. These are good tools. These are good technologies that we should be using. We should not be relying on them solely. The same way we don't rely on the steam engine just like that. The same way we don't just rely on electricity or oil or jet engines. We continuously improve our tools, our technologies, the same way the technology that we have, what we call reason and analytics, empiricism, they're useful. We see things, we put the data together, we develop theories, we solve problems, we error correct, we improve. All these things are fine. The same way we should be improving on our own technologies, on our own, let's say, tools to even think, which is reason. And that's, I think, what, in my view, comes out of this book. I don't think we need to kill each other if we are, let's say, not happy with reason. Let's say we at Orange Capital Partners are certainly not happy with pure reasoning. We believe that a lot of reasoning that goes on in financial markets is the kind of reasoning where Thomas Mann would call it almost petulance, and also to some extent stupor. So he says, now this is just sort of a side note, the end of the book is a very dark introduction into what's coming, namely World War I. And he said it's an accumulation of petulance and stupor. And I think those are words that are not really used that much in the English language. At least I haven't heard them before. What is petulance? It's sort of this childish, sulky behavior, salty, nasty, childish, stupid behavior, sort of ego. You heard my ego, I heard your ego kind of thing. And then stupor is this sort of almost hazy, passive, slipping into some sort of disaster. So I think that's what Thomas Mann rightly so expresses in a very frustrated way, how society is sort of slipping into this disaster that was called World War I. So I would say that the financial markets, Wall Street, is in a similar situation now. We have this petulance, which is like I always make jokes about financial analysts or jokes. I mean, it's a much more serious issue. Financial analysts on Wall Street are having, let's say, they're giving 3 price targets, a high one, a middle one, and a low one, which to me is complete capitulation. That means we don't know, we can't reason, we can't, practice anymore our profession, but we still use the same tools, which are, it's completely used. What am I supposed to do with a stock like Tesla that has a price target of 2,000, 1,000, and 200? Well, what am I supposed to do with that information? So it's completely capitulation, but you can't give up on reason. You can't give up on the pseudo-analytical behavior, and their reports are still, written like as if they were scientific papers, and it just doesn't help. It's not helpful, and it's, in my view, it is petulance, which will end up in some sort of, it will end up in it will end up badly, hopefully not in a war, of course, but I think the financial system as we know it is on the cusp of being replaced by something else, and of course that will be blockchain. This is for another episode. Let's get back to the Magic Mountain. So I think the third aspect I want to talk about is love. Love is an important aspect also, very much in favor in those times by the Russians, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. And I think also here, there is Claudia. She is the woman of desire. She is the woman that Castorp sort of uses as a catalyst for the feeling of love. There is no love scene in this book. I think there's one short scene where there's an exchange of glances, maybe even touching of fingers or something along those lines. Certainly nothing more than that, no sex, no nothing like that. And Claudia is, of course, the symbol of love. I would say it is similar to the Nafta Santabrini forces which are clashing. The same thing is clashing here. Love, the way I read it in the Magic Mountain, is a dangerous thing, a beautiful thing, a thing that can put the reason, the analytics, the sober, established man out of control. I mean, this is, of course, also the Christian, or an old Christian way of looking at love. But I think also there is beauty in the description of love, the way Mann is using it. So I'm not quite sure how to interpret love. I'm just putting it here because it's an important part of the book. It's certainly something also that occupies me as a person. I think love, by the way, in a more broader sense, not just love from man to woman, or man to man, woman to woman, but also love more broadly, love for people, love for, let's say, we at Orange Capital Partners certainly feel love for innovation, new ideas. We love what Tesla is doing. We literally love it. It's not just a metaphor. It makes us happy. It makes us proud. It makes us risk a lot. It makes us go to war for, let's say, what Tesla's doing, or SpaceX. Last year, we went to Boca Chica. We saw Starship 9 just before it was launched and blew up. And we still have that picture. It hangs in our living room. We took a picture of it. And it's just, it fills us with love. So what love is hard for me to explain. I think it's the feeling that we have when we're positive. And this is very, very important. Coming to the fourth aspect of the book, which is the sort of the flywheel, I would say this is the positive side. I personally, I refuse to use this ending, this dark ending of the book as a sort of end of world type message. To me, it has a different meaning. To me, there is creation and there's death. Death is a big part of the book. Of course, the whole scene of the Magic Mountain is in a sanatorium, which is a sort of a hospital in Davos. Davos was built for those types of things, where sick people would go and cure their usually lung disease type problems. But then it turned into a sort of rich people's playground, rich people's refuge, and that's part of the story that Mann is also alluding to. I think death and this morbidity and the sickness and being sick and feeling sick and all these kinds of things, they are certainly part of the book. But then there's also, in my view, there's this positive reincarnation. There's reincarnation, there's hope, there's spirit, there's love. Even the end of the book, where the author basically says farewell to Hans Castorp and alludes to the fact that probably he's going to go down to the flatlands, which is out of the sanatorium, away from Davos, back home to Germany, and go to war and die. But there is some sort of hope, because he alludes to the fact that his spirit, his being, his experience, his consciousness, whatever we call the soul maybe, will survive. His knowledge, the knowledge that he gathered through the years up there, will not die. And maybe it won't die just because it was written down in this book. So this is a very personal message that Thomas Mann is sending. I think a personal message. This is not just some sort of novelist writing a novel here. This is, look, I think what Hans Castorp went through, we are all going through in Germany. We might all die, but I have it written down here in the book. His experience is written down in the book, and that's great. So this is, I think, the most important factor, the most important powerful message that this book is giving me personally, which is this feeling of hope. Within the midst of the biggest disaster that humanity has seen, which is World War I, just commencing, I think, around the time of the writing of the book, there is hope. There is hope in morbidity, in death, because of love. And we don't have solutions to the problem of reason and the limits of reason, to the question of God is dead, what comes after. We don't have those solutions, but we have love. We also have the arts and music, which is another theme which I want to sort of put into the rubric of love. I think love, what is it we love about something like, let's say, SpaceX or Tesla? It's the iteration, the humility, the improvement, the finding better solutions for better problems, the error correction. All these things to us feel like love. What is love between two human beings? It's an iteration again. It's an iteration. I like this about you, like this about me. Somehow it works. Sometimes it works. There's reciprocity. I make a little bit of a concession, you make a bit of a concession. We can actually work together, live together. Together we're stronger. Those types of things, they fill me with love. They fill us with love. And I feel like that's what this book is ultimately conveying, which is that we have limits of reason, limits, of course, of mysticism and sort of anti-reason, but we have tools, and one of them is emotions and love and arts and iteration and the quest for better that comes even when death looms. Death looms to all of us, but we don't need to be desperate about that, because we have hope. We can, through arts and music and love, overcome those challenges and get better. And this is, to me, the most important feeling that I get from this book. Thank you.